Methuselah lived for 969 years. Adam lived for 930. Noah was still alive at 950. And then something happened, and the numbers collapsed. Within just a few generations after the flood, humans went from living nearly 1,000 years to struggling to reach 80. And nobody ever told you why. This is one of the most fascinating and most overlooked patterns in all of Scripture. It sits right there in the genealogies of Genesis that most people skip over. A mathematical curve so dramatic and so precise that it reads like a countdown. And when you understand what is actually happening in those numbers, you will never read the Bible the same way again. We start in Genesis chapter 5. This chapter is often called the begats, the long list of who lived how long and who they had children with. And most people read past it in about 30 seconds on their way to Noah and the ark. But stop, because hidden inside those numbers is one of the most important stories in Scripture. The story of what humanity lost and why we lost it. Adam lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912. Enos 905. Cainan 910. Malaleel 895. Jared 962. And then we reach the man everyone has heard of, even if they have never read the Bible. Methuselah, 969 years. The oldest human being ever recorded in Scripture. A man who was alive for more than 2/3 of all of recorded biblical history from creation to the flood. A man who, according to the genealogy, died in the very year the flood began. Think about that for a moment. Methuselah did not survive the flood. He died the year it started. And his name in Hebrew carries a meaning that has fascinated scholars for centuries. Most translate it as, when he dies, it shall be sent, or his death shall bring. Which means every single year that Methuselah kept breathing was another year of grace before the judgment fell. The oldest man in history was also a living prophecy. And the moment he died, the rain began. Now here is where the story gets even more extraordinary. Look at what God says in Genesis 6 verse 3, right before the flood, right in the middle of the account of the corruption of the earth. God says, "My spirit will not contend with humans forever, for they are mortal. Their days will be 120 years. And this is one of the most debated verses in Genesis, because scholars have argued for centuries about what exactly those 120 years mean. Some say it was a countdown to the flood, a warning of 120 years before judgment. Others say it was God establishing a new biological limit on human life. And the fascinating thing is that both interpretations are supported by what happens next in the biblical timeline. Because after the flood, the numbers begin to drop, and they drop in a pattern so deliberate that it cannot be accidental. Noah himself lived 950 years, but he was born before the flood. His son Sem, who was also born before the flood, lived 600 years. But then the post-flood generations begin, and watch what happens. Arphaxad lived 438 years, Salah 433, Heber 464, Peleg 239, Reu 239, Serug 230, Nahor only 148, Terah 205, Abraham 175, Isaac 180, Jacob 147, Moses 120, Joshua 110, David 70. Do you see it? Generation by generation, century by century, the years are bleeding away. It is not random, it is a curve, a gradual but unmistakable decline from nearly 1,000 years of life down to the 70 or 80 years that Moses writes about in Psalm 90 when he says, "The years of our life are 70, or by reason of strength 80. And Moses knew exactly what he was writing because he had just read the genealogies himself and watch the numbers fall. Now the question that everyone eventually asks is why? Why did humans live so long before the flood? And why did that change so dramatically afterward? And there are several serious theories that deserve your attention. The first is atmospheric. Many biblical scholars and scientists have proposed that before the flood, the earth had a fundamentally different atmosphere. Genesis 1 describes waters above the firmament, a canopy of water vapor surrounding. The Earth that would have filtered ultraviolet radiation, increased atmospheric pressure, and created conditions that were dramatically more favorable for long life. After the flood, that canopy collapsed into the 40 days of rain, and the Earth was left exposed to conditions far harsher than anything the pre-flood world had experienced. The second is genetic. Every human being carries genetic mutations, small copying errors that accumulate from generation to generation. In the early generations close to Adam and Eve, the human genome was nearly perfect. The original design was still intact, and the body had an extraordinary capacity for repair and longevity. But as generations passed and as genetic drift and mutation accumulated, the lifespan shortened. This is not evolution in the Darwinian sense. It is devolution, the gradual degradation of an originally perfect design. The third is dietary. Genesis 9 is the first time God explicitly tells Noah that humans may eat meat. Before the flood, the biblical record suggests a primarily plant-based diet, and some researchers have proposed that the shift to meat consumption along with changes in the Earth's environment after the flood contributed to the dramatic shortening of human life. And then there is the spiritual dimension, which may be the most important of all. The pre-flood world, despite its corruption, was still closer in time to the original creation, closer to Eden, closer to the moment when God breathed life directly into Adam. The further humanity moved from that moment and from God's original design, the shorter and more fragile human life became. Sin introduced death into creation, and death was always going to do its work. Slowly at first, and then faster and faster as the distance from the garden grew. There is something else in the genealogy that almost no one notices. A man named Enoch. And Enoch is remarkable not for how long he lived, but for how short his time on earth was compared to everyone around him. He lived only 365 years, which by the standards of Genesis 5 is barely middle-aged. And then Genesis 5 verse 24 says simply, Enoch walked with God, and then he was no more because God took him. Enoch did not die. He was taken directly into the presence of God without passing through death. And he stands in the middle of this genealogy of dying men as a signal, a reminder that the original purpose of human life was never death. It was fellowship with God, eternal, unbroken fellowship. And the shortening of years was never God's original plan, but the consequence of a world that walked away from him. By the time we reach Moses and David, the human lifespan has settled into the range we still recognize today. 70, 80 years if you are strong. And Moses writes about it in Psalm 90, not as a complaint, but as a meditation on the brevity of life in light of the eternity of God. 1,000 years in your sight are like a watch in the night, he writes, and there is a beauty in that. Because what Moses understood is that the length of a life is not what gives it meaning. It is the presence of God in that life that makes it matter. Enoch lived 365 years and walked with God, and that was enough for God to take him home. And David lived 70 years and was called a man after God's own heart. You may never live to 969 like Methuselah. In fact, you almost certainly will not. But the question the Bible is asking you with every one of those ancient numbers is not how long will you live, but how will you live? Will you walk with God like Enoch? Will you trust God like Noah? Will you be called faithful in whatever years you are given? Because the God who breathed 900 years of life into Adam is the same. God who holds every day of your life in his hands right now, and not one of those days is wasted when it is lived in his presence. If this video made you think about something you have never thought about before, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Proverbs and Purpose, because the untold stories of Scripture are just getting started.